Great. That's us. Let me give you a tiny bit about my background, so we're all on the same footing. Uh, I've been doing this for a long time too. I've been in a career that started as a military officer teaching leadership and strategy in combat. I then was in a tiny startup after I became a civilian that was doing energy technology and the ability to create super scrub zero emission. Fun, loved it. Tiny company that we got to just under $1 billion, and then I got recruited by Nestle. And I worked with Nestle for 15 years. And as a reward for my hard work or a punishment for my sins, I eventually became their head of executive leader development and got to go live for a few years in Switzerland at their headquarters and figure out what teaching leadership and management in a 300,000 person company looks like. And many times it doesn't look pretty. I was recruited away from Nestle after 15 years to go work for Amazon. So that brings me back to the States. And I was at Amazon. I was only at Amazon for 4 years, but they had an opportunity for me to build, greenfield, completely from scratch, what their learning and talent management approach would be. And in that 4 years that I was there, Amazon grew from just under 8,000 employees to 130,000. So that was like being, in an explosion. Snidely at Amazon, we referred to it as feeding the growth monster. And it was a great education in change, in agility, in having to reinvent the idea of how you educate and develop people with that kind of explosive growth. And then, craving relative calm, I went over to Microsoft, which is also up in Seattle. They were 40 years old by the time I joined Microsoft, which is like a grandparent in the in high-tech age. And I enjoyed that perspective, but quite honestly, I got more of what I expected, and so I got a little bored at Microsoft. I was only there shortly more than a year. And since then, I have been rewarding myself in life by playing in the startup. And I have been in 2 startup companies, both in Manhattan, in the last 3.5 years, including a little over a year here at Knotel, and I've absolutely loved it. I liken it to being in the rodeo. There's always something new, there's always something different. Okay, so let me check again. Can we all hear each other, and we'll begin our discussion?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, great. Now we have a prescribed discussion that basically says, what's happened to our learning and development strategy? What are the new considerations in the way that we've approached it? How has it had to be tweaked and how has it had to be adapted? And then ultimately, we're asking ourselves, what are the key priorities or topics that emerge? But because there's only a couple of us here, I think that gives us a certain amount of liberty to make this discussion what we want it to be. So I suggest that we kind of start here with the discussion about the basics of our L&D strategy and how it's emerged. And then if we go afield, and perhaps far afield, that's perfectly fine. I mean, with a small group, the luxury is we can tailor it to where we need to go, if we're all in agreement about that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. So this is a discussion. It's not a presentation, so let's really cue it up that way. There's 3 of us, so you're perfectly safe. And the thing that kind of gets the ball rolling, I think, not only in our conversation, but I think when you wake up in the morning in this world, is what's the impact on your industry, on your company, and is your L&D strategy appropriate for that changing world, and what has been forced to change, if you will? Have you guys given much thought to how L&D strategy differs in a world where your industry may be seriously impacted?
I think from my perspective, I got my MBA in '08 from Columbia and was introduced to a lot of structure around L&D and other business practices, and then being immersed in pre-Series B or Series B companies for a decade. Not a lot of those were relevant, valued, or showed up. It was, we raised some money, we hired salespeople, and we have coders, go. It's gotten a little better as we got into 2000. I think COVID has now thrown everything out the window again. But, in general, I mean, just hearing you last week and the possibility today, it's like, how do we cram what you do into a world that is dealing with, handful to 40 people, nobody that's focused on your role 100% of the time, and avoid pitfalls and get the best things out of it to keep the organization valuing leadership and development investments, even when you're just trying to get your first million and get to 10 million and look like $100 million company. Because I feel like it gets overlooked 9 times out of 10 or 99 out of 100. So that's kind of my umbrella for being here and pulling stuff out is how to better prioritize these myself or enlist others to respect and appreciate and value leadership and development investments, because they pay out with solid growth, with great culture and teams, and all the other pros that you can add to it.
Well, I love that. I love that orientation. And it's interesting, though, because what I think happens, and Barbara, chime in if I have this backwards, and I may, you've got this growing need, you've got this growing awareness of probably what the need always was. At the same time, it's a world almost impossible to ask for more resources to go after it or to change it, and so it requires a great deal of creativity, I think. Barbara, what's been your experience?
Well, it's very interesting because when this whole ordeal started, I was very optimistic because I thought, okay, we're just gonna do what we've always done. But I think the patience on people is wearing down, and I think you need to show, like the leadership for me has always been, you live up, you have to live what you say you do. In other words, I would never act differently than what I believed in. And, at this point, it has always worked because if your goals are beautiful, then people are naturally attracted to it and they will follow in a natural way. But this world is kind of tough because, first of all, people are being pulled in different directions, and looks like we are just in the beginning. So that is when people realize that. I think that the first couple of months is okay, we'll go through it and everything goes back to normal. And now people realize that the new normal has to be changed. It's not going to be the same as it was before.
Yeah, and I think that we see this, okay, not to get too nerdy or academic, but a million years ago in science, so 70 years ago, Thomas Kuhn, K-U-H-N, one of my favorite writers, wrote a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolution. You got to go read this book. If you're in the world of business and strategy, he's describing science. He's a scientist, but it's like the established view, then the transformational discovery, and what happens when people underestimate the foundational significance of that discovery, and then what happens when people do realize it and are threatened or want to go back to it or want to resist, and then how does the revolution finally succeed? So I think you can see the parallel to the Thunderdome world that we're living in today. And I think, Barbara, you're exactly right. I think all of us started with like, oh, okay. Then it was kind of like, oh, okay, it's significant, but it'll end. And now we're kind of like, ooh, okay, this may be transformational and long lasting. I mean, I'm proud to say that New York now has the lowest transmission rate of COVID-19 in the country. But in many ways, that curve is just beginning to turn sharper the rest of the places in the country. So this could easily come back. My son is in medical school, and because he has got either a dark sense of humor or a desire to hurt people, both of which will help you as a doctor if you really think about it. Yeah, he tells me that the 1918 flu second wave was almost twice as big as the first wave.
Yep.
And so I've stopped calling him. I won't talk to him anymore because I don't find that helpful at all. But I think, Barbara, you're right. I think there's this dawning realization. And those of us who are living in this, then how do you prepare people? What do they need to learn? What is the profile of the effective leader or the effective employee we're trying to build? We're having to do that in tandem of this new environment emerging. We might start with here's how you're brilliant in this world, and we'll back it into then what kind of a person we're trying to build. But we don't have that end state. So we're making our best guesses, and we're having to be pretty agile. Now, here's the benefit too. It makes us very empathetic with our students. These business leaders, these strategists are in the same boat. They're realizing that they prize agility, but they don't know what the target is. They can't guess. So I started out early in my life as a combat commander, which is a fairly volatile, uncertain, sometimes complex, and ambiguous environment. It'd be like being a nursery school teacher. And from that background, as weird as it is, I spend a lot of time, I won't say coaching because that's a very special set of skills, but maybe coaching and teaching and being kind of a development buddy to a lot of senior executives. And the hardest habit for them to break, and I think it's getting less hard as the world rubs their nose in this, is they have been trained their whole life from Jonathan, beautiful Columbia Business School just up the road from us, and other great MBA programs about here are the skills and abilities to, in effect, predict the future. And so they really are boxed into this corner where they're supposed to be brilliant strategists who border on being clairvoyant, right? We anticipate this, and here's the downside in the worst case, and press forward. And I teach these executives all the time, that's silly. If you've seduced yourself into thinking you're smart enough or clairvoyant enough, you're going to get yourself wiped out. I tell them that in a world of rapid change, it's where you think you know something that gets you blindsided because you're not really looking there. And so what I tell them and what I think is important to our adaptive strategy is you build for robustness, not clairvoyance, right?
I like that.
Clairvoyance means I'm pretty sure it's going to end up like this. Therefore, we build the strategy to hit that target. And then we try to be a little flexible and adapt as we go because no one's perfect. But the truth is we've always been taught that. And now what we're saying is three diametrically opposite worlds may emerge. And only the fool thinks they can place the bet right now. Is there a strategy that at least survives, if not excels, in opposite worlds? And that's very interesting. It sends you to a very different place, I think. So I would love to explore what that might look like. And I don't just mean, we'll talk about topics or skills we're going to teach later, but for us, the four of us, the Ashley or Jan, the five of us with Ashley, as L&D people, what is our strategy? And it doesn't have to be completely refined, but this notion of how do you build for robustness rather than clairvoyance? What might be that learning strategy? And I'm just wondering if you've had any experience with it. Do you have ideas that you could share with us? Be brave.
Mm.
I have a question if there's nobody sharing.
Hell no, no questions, Jonathan.
All right.
Yes, please.
What I've seen mostly through interacting with sales communities and some management communities the last month or so is, everybody's facing these global challenges that are fun and affecting business at all angles. But a lot of the conversations seem to be, even on leadership and development, but become tactical from internal silos down. Mm-hmm. So within sales, how do you change your numbers? How do you change your KPIs? How do you motivate your teams to, make these changes? And it seems like more often than not, the mirror is not being reflected on leadership and development to the management team. What are we doing cross-functionally? How is the game's not changed? The whole field has been thrown out, and we're inventing a new game as we go. But are all the C's talking to each other? Are they, we're talking with the board? Are they appreciative of the market dynamics? And then looking at the organization for changes. So, and having sat at the C level and tried to have those conversations in the past, I just imagine right now they're much more challenging because nobody really knows, and you have to, just have that frank look in the mirror and be like, we don't know. And I loved your robust versus clairvoyant. Like, how do you get everybody together to have the robust conversation to be like, we're in travel and hospitality, or we're a bar, or we're trying to sell software into those spaces. There's a new norm, and it's not changing for years. What are we going to do as a business? I don't feel like those conversations are happening. I'm not hearing enough good examples about how people are dealing with it. Just the Amazon's making more money now, but not really changing how they do business.
I know. My stock has gone from first of all, 1,800 a share. God bless Jeff Bezos. I can almost forgive all his shortcomings in his personality for this. 1,800 a share was pretty good. I got paid back in the day when it was 180.
Oh.
It has almost doubled.
Wow.
If you can imagine, from 1,800, broken 3,000 in the last week.
Right.
So, wow. Product delivery and gouging are apparently the industry to be in right now.
Yeah.
And I am very impressed even by Amazon standards. Jonathan, I think you are very smart. In spite of what anybody around you may be telling you, sir, I think there's first of all, I appreciate your use of the adjective fun, because it has been incredibly fun. I will also tell you that one of the secret ingredients of resilience, in the spirit of the psychological part of robustness, is sense of humor. So, not to get off track here, you gotta, please, don't lose sight of a sense of humor, because it is great for your personal resilience. I think also there's some keen insight in what you're saying, because it captures both the what and the how.
Mm-hmm.
So not to get didactic here, but we know through empirical evidence that invariably cross-functional teams are more robust and more capable to envision the magnitude and the effectiveness of adaptation. I mean, think
Mm-hmm.
about it. 5 men and women sitting in a room sharing different perspectives and saying, what if? Are going to build this robust strategy that needs to survive in a highly divergent world. Then if you are the lone genius closeted away, thinking, well, I have my specialty and I know how to predict the future. And I'm not saying you have to go in and reinvent everything in cross-functional teams. I will tell you that is exactly what we've done at Knotel. And the teams are these 5 strategies in the marketplace we have to win. So they go straight to the heart of what those victories need to be, and they are completely cross-functional. One of them is, how do you invent a world where, remote is the norm? We're in the office space business. This has been an interesting pandemic, and it's hard to not feel like a victim and paranoid when the global pandemic comes in and targets whether or not office space is needed. So we're trying to be agile. Teams are not the only way, but they are a good way to get at what Jonathan is expressing here. I also think that he's onto something with the, you got to be right. I'm not picking on Columbia, Jonathan. As a
Oh,
matter
please do. I owe them money, so pick on them all you want.
I could be abusive.
No, I have a couple of sliding doors that didn't open to Amazon that could have, but
All right, all right.
Yep.
Well, listen, you've been as blessed as you have been cursed. Let me assure you, Amazon's an exotic place. This will actually be a praise to Columbia University. I'm speaking ancient history now, but remember, I'm just very, very good looking, but I'm actually 85 years old. This is probably all the way back in the early 90s. Columbia Business School in association with their executive education program. So these are people who have left the business school, become successful executives, climbed the ladder, and now in companies that are successful enough that they can afford to send their executives off to executive education for, back then, $5,000 a week of training, which today is probably $25,000. Okay? So this is an interesting group of fairly senior, successful executives from around the world. Now, here was the study. One bold graduate student wanted to test this idea of how do you, tumble into the future successfully. And this whole group of 100 executives sitting auditorium style at the business school were handed a sheet of paper on which there were 10 questions. Now, the questions were interesting because the questions were the kinds of questions that you wouldn't know the answer to, but they weren't so far-fetched that you didn't think you wouldn't think that you couldn't get to the answer. How many gas stations are in an average-sized city? If, X is the number of cars supported by a gas station and Y is the size of a typical city. I don't know that number, but I think, okay, then about how many people in the population have a car, how many gas stations, assuming a perfect market, it's blah, 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 and right, so I can get there. Approximately how many stars are in the Milky Way galaxy? How many manhole covers, people hole covers, are there in a city of approximately 5 square miles? Okay, got it? 1 through 10. Not nonsensical, but they are not the kinds of questions you would know the answer to off the top of their head. Now here's the test. The rules of this game were you could make your answer a range. And the range could be as narrow or as wide as you wanted. It was just that you had to make this range such that you were 90% certain, 90% certain that the right answer would lie within that range. Okay? Not complicated. Now, here's the kicker. You, my brilliant executives, I want you to estimate the answers, the score of your answering this test before you begin. Now, you would think the prediction would come back 90%. I think I'm going to get 90%. That's how I'm going to. The answer of these averages of the predicted score was 94%, which means a few of you get the executives said, I'm nailing this thing at 100%, right? Then they took the test, and they then, like we all did in grade school, shifted our papers and started to self-grade, with everybody grading someone else's test. So the answer to one is blah, 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 blah. Now, what began to appear, what did the audience begin to look like as the graduate student, now trembling rather than being bold, is reading off to all these possible future employers what the right answers are. And if somewhere in that range it lands, that's correct. If it's out of that range, it's wrong. What is the mood in the room beginning to be as the test answers are announced? Yeah. Shock, dismay, argumentative. Oh, you meant this Milky Way galaxy, right? That's bullshit, man. Right? Resistance. So they now take the actual graded test and they take the average score that's received and what is the average score of the class of these best and brightest senior executives?
Ooh, 50% at best.
Yeah. 23%. Now with 23, even if you went to a small West Texas school like I did, 23 is a failing grade, right? I mean, that's, unless you play football, then we're going to figure out a way to get you out there. 23%.
Wow.
What is going on here? Well, tell me what the mechanism has to be in terms of a big, wild world that I am trying to face the future. What are the triggers here?
They missed the instructions. I can see my classmates doing it because we did a similar test, and their confidence ranges were too small and they were overconfident, and they could have easily just picked the entire range of numbers and gotten 100, but they thought they knew how many gas stations would be in Sheboygan, and they were wrong.
I appreciate that the concreteness of your example. If you've been to Sheboygan, it is a wonderful place.
3 is the answer.
Yeah,
but
I mean, Jonathan's exactly right. We have an overt, obvious strategy of how to get 100%, don't we? 0 to infinity, 1 through 10, 100%. There's no doubt. I mean, these guys and gals have an above average IQ or they're not at Columbia Business School executive education. This is not complex. But Jonathan's right. There is this value placed on guessing with a certain amount of precision. You know, where's the art in me saying it could be anything? I have been reinforced and taught my whole life, our whole lives, in business, almost to think that precision equals accuracy. Now, I'm not playing semantics here. Precision is the width of the band, right? The number of variables, the tolerance within it. And accuracy is getting it right, something landing within that band. So it is very hard for executives not only to feel overconfident about the world you're now trying to prepare them for, and feeling pressured to do it without saying some wild guess that they feel like any amateur off the street could give. So instead of me saying how many stars are in the Milky Way galaxy, and I say, I don't know, a few million, probably I might boldly say 100,000 to 1 billion, and I have no idea that it's 134 billion. And I have no idea how much I have no idea. And I miss it. And part of that transformation that we're going to have to teach as a strategy to our company, I think, and follow as a strategy for ourselves, is recognize the premium on a fairly wide bracket. So I don't know where we're practicing that, but I think we can see the relationship between a wide bracket and a robust strategy. And that's not what's happened. And it's not just executives. It's us too, isn't it? I want you to tell me how to precisely fix this with some learning and development. Now, we've known for a while that's crazy, right? Not everything is training. Not everything is the cause you think it is. But now it's major. What else? What else are ways that we either look at the strategy or we've specifically adapted the strategy?
I think because of their silence, I'll talk again. The overinvestment and the lack of appreciation of some cost on strategies that don't work. Doubling down.
Yeah, man. First of all, you got it. I would have blown my brains out if I hear that catchphrase again. This is an example of good money after bad, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
What would be an example of one of those strategies where you see an investment and then you can no longer look objectively at its effectiveness?
Overarching for me, my 80-20 rule is that there's enough people still alive that think 1999 was 2019 when it comes to software sales, and they structure everything in the organization like they're going to get a big 6-7 figure deal up front. When buyers have evolved to SaaS and are happy to take free pilots and get to total contract value 24 months after that first signature. And it's my uphill battle in interviews to advisory roles to frontline performer to help that battleship turn into not into the headwinds, but, moving full steam in the new world to say, we've got to make these shifts. And everybody still thinks to a degree they can sell that big Oracle pre-Y2K mega 7-figure deal, and nobody knows who they are as a brand. But that's my own private soapbox.
Oh, I love that example. I think that's a great example. And I like the example particularly because there's this tangible idea of what it is that people are buying. There's also this very tangible idea of what a reasonable expectation is.
Yeah.
Right? So I may intellectually tell you, oh, I get that the market around SaaS is growing and the market around, preemptively just buying the whole package of software is changing. I may not still make the personal connection that says, and this, and this, and this for my fallout expectations. And it's both, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I like that. I like that example of a shift. What else? What else are either examples of shifts that we're having to prepare the company to make, or that we're having to follow ourselves in our L&D strategy? Anything else?
Well, in my field, what I've noticed as an example is that I don't know if this is the result of TV shows or whatnot, but a lot of people think they can be architects themselves without an, like they see the show, how this thing is made it easy, and they don't value the expertise that we can offer. And, they have also developed programs that look into a three-dimensional world. And, whereas we have ability to see it without the computer is in our head. We see it, we know it, we can advise. So my challenge is how to educate people that you can't do everything yourself, that there's more to it. And I think, present a value in what we offer, because I think this is the challenge, not just for me, but for our industry in general, is that, unless you're doing a skyscraper on ground zero, something like this, like everything else seems pretty much manageable. So that is.
Well, I really love Barbara's use of the word value, right? I mean, we live in a world where we talk about profit. Now, profit is not abstract. You've got this kind of a top line, you take out your certain expenses, you got a bottom line, that gap is profit. But we all really live in a world of value. Right. And value is a perception.
Perception.
Right? Value is from your client's point of view.
Yes.
Value is what you are in the business of creating, and maybe the output of that shared perception is profit. Right?
Right.
We're not in the business of making profit, are we? We've got to go upstream and we've got to create value. And you're right, Barbara. In an age of tumult, people don't know what the answer is, But because they're trying to make sense, because they're trying to reach out and educate themselves, they sometimes undervalue the role of the expert, right? And listen, let's be fair. Sometimes that is justified because an expert can be entrenched in the world that once was, right? They bring that skill set out. Now, the expert who understands the key levers can also be extraordinarily adaptive and still bring that expertise. And that is not someone who you would not want on your team as you try to figure out what's going on. But there will almost always, Barbara, be this battle for the perception of value. Because panicked people will frequently overestimate or underestimate what needs to be changed. A lot of them will take, you're exactly right. They watch 8 TV shows and they take on the do-it-yourself attitude. And it just creates, a lot of chaos. But in an ill-defined future, it is hard for people to place a proper value on expertise.
Mm-hmm.
I've hinted at this a couple of times. And what my experiences show, which means it may be completely flawed, but that ultimately, whether you're talking about your core knowledge as an expert, whether or not you're talking about the emergence of fundamentally different markets and expectations of customers, whether you're talking about really kind of the core, the foundation of your business model, the skill that we're trying to apply to our look at learning development strategy and the skill that we're trying to imbue our organizations with is something that I call adaptive capacity. Okay? So it's not just about the wide range. The wide range is a robust strategy that can survive if 3, 4 diametrically opposite worlds emerge, right? So we're going to bite the bullet and tolerate building a wide range. But do you understand that as you get to the key Vista points, as you tumble into that future, you do see and learn certain things if your eyes are open. And you've got to have the ability to be agile once things are known within that wide bracket. Now, you don't want to guess. You don't want to do this thing where you think you're the master of the universe and clairvoyant. So you build this ability to shift, this adaptive capacity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this sounds weird. I realize that everything I've said in my life sounds like it doesn't matter and it's semantics. So let me explain in mechanics why this is the strategy that I won't even say advise. Empirically, I've experienced this is important. Here's the way we do L&D strategy, and quite honestly, the way most of our clients do strategy. Now, they stick a flag out there in the future. And because they're smart, and they're like Jonathan, they went to a very good school, it is a flag. It's a point out there. This is where we're headed because this is the world we'll find ourselves in, right? And because they're really gifted, they can then take a step back and a step back and a step back from that flag, and that's the strategy and the tactics to hit that point. Now, as they get to one step into the future, they realize the flag is not exactly right, right? So they go, now if it lands within those boundaries, I still get credit. The flag is right. They get to the next Vista point. They see some things that are and some things that aren't, and their bracket's not quite right. So they say, okay, we think that this range of things could happen. Okay? That's fine. A little bit humiliating. Please, God, don't let me get a 23 on the exam. We're now tumbling forward into the future. And because we know more, we're adjusting the range of what we think would accomplish our goal of, quite honestly, proving that the flag was right. I mean, it's kind of like what Jonathan has said, damn, we are committed. We are committed to this strategy. We're committed to this course. And we'll never admit that it might be executive hubris. We just have made our best guess and we're headed toward it. We've now tumbled a few more paces into the future. We've got the new Vista Point, and because fate is cruel and the universe has a sixth sense of humor, the bracket goes like that to try to accommodate. Okay, you get my idea. And then
you move the flag.
Right? I mean, that's it. And the whole thing is anchored by the humorousness of the first guess. Right? And you're stretching from this flag to get to what actually happened. Now, think about what that we have surfaced here. What we have surfaced in our discussion, even though it sounds like semantics, is exactly the opposite. We say, we're going in with a wide bracket, right? These are a wide bracket. We're going to pass the Columbia Business School test. Damn it. So our bracket is wide. We're 90% sure. We're building the strategy for robustness. Not that we know exactly where to place a flag. And we want strategies that succeed or at least survive if 4, 5, 6 diametrically opposite worlds emerge. And we tumble a little bit into the future. And we get to a Vista Point. And because we're valuing our agility and our adaptive capacity, we now know certain things. And we narrow the bracket. We know this thing out here can't occur. We've got a very wide, we get to another Vista Point. We're here to learn. We're here to be agile. So we're looking out there and saying, what is it? And now the range has grown more narrow. The probability of what can happen is driven by everything that's happened. The world is less unknown. Certain facts are true now, and we get tighter. The next Vista Point, do you see that our strategy actually is getting narrower and narrower as facts emerge, as opposed to broader and broader as our guess is proven wrong?
This is amazing, actually. Thank you for saying this.
Oh, well, you're welcome. This is a strategy we promise it, we practice in combat. So if you've got people who are a little more emotionally balanced, you're not going to want to share the source of this. But do you get what I'm saying? Now, none of this works if you don't have the humility and the rationality to accept a broad bracket, right? I mean, we don't know what the hell's going to happen. If you don't have the intellectual capacity to hold convergent and divergent thoughts in your head about what might emerge, if you don't have the core value of preserving your future opportunities through robustness as opposed to arrogant clairvoyance, and the core capacity here is agility, right? You get there, see it for what it really is, and you adapt. You get there, and guess what, guys? 0 to 100, 100%. That's the way you play this game. And I know that, I mean, you guys are in the learning business. We're in the learning and communication business. To some degree, even though it wasn't necessarily articulated, we've known this. Our business leaders don't. And it's not their fault. It's Columbia's fault, Jonathan. Damn it.
I wholeheartedly agree. One of the things I took away, I was a liberal arts theater major that 10 years later graduated with an MBA. And I always loved looking around the room at people that wanted to work 80 hours a week, really smart, could do financial modeling and accounting 1,000 times better than me. And I wish I could do financial modeling and make that money, but I just don't, it's not in me and I don't have the passion for it. But I loved looking around the room when the soft classes or lessons were being taught and just the confusion on people's faces.
Right.
Like everything from, well, Pepsi's Pepsi. And it's like, well, no, Pepsi started somewhere, to, how do you leverage emotional intelligence to, connect with somebody, and why did 80% of the class fail in this exercise by calling the CEO first and skipping over the executive administrator and failed this entire, exercise. Like all of those moments, I was like, okay, I'm bringing something to the table. And what I loved out of everything you just said is it tied everything together. And to me, it screams at why, when VCs claim that they value leadership when they invest in somebody that has this narrow band, they don't force somebody that's taking $10 million to spend $100,000 with Rich to sit twice a quarter on things like this to make sure that the leadership team is on the same page. When you do a soft pivot, everybody's not going to get cross-haired ass bent over something. And the team's like, all right, the band has narrowed, the band has moved. Here we're going this way, and we're all working together. And instead, you see the fall off 6 months, 12 months after each raise because they can't do it. And VCs are happy because I only need 1% of my portfolio to work. And founders are happy because once you raise money once, you can raise money again. It's everybody else that's collateral damage. And sorry, but the example that I saw this week from CNN's 1968 was, if this was war and you showed up in Vietnam in 1968 and you were a Marine and there was 0 people on the ground with in-city combat experience and you were asked to go door to door, like that's a bracket that you were too narrow on, that you have to expand now and pivot and learn on the fly, and it means your life. Like if startups were that drastic, like I think people would pay attention, but because, everybody's got competing interests and aren't focused on this rich conversation, and that, I try to find that, and it's hard. It's just not universal.
It's not. Now, one thing.
Another soapbox, sorry.
Well, no, I mean, one thing we should practice is a little bit of generous mercy. Right? These are not people who are doing this because they're stupid. They're not intensely recalcitrant. They're not trying to be obnoxious. Everything in their life has not only taught this to them, but it has reinforced it for them up to the point of this traumatic revolution. And it's that certitude that will get them killed. Right? In a fundamental sense, Thomas Kuhn would be proud. In a fundamental sense, the scientific knowledge, the conventional wisdom flipped. And the things that brought you victory are the things that will upend you with the rest of the old world. And that's what we need to be demonstrating. That's what we need to be practicing in our own functional learning and development. And that's what true leadership is that ability to be agile, to teach people to change, to keep them focused on a North Star, but be very adaptive about the way they're climbing the mountain. And if we practice it, it's a great example. And besides that, it's what will work for us in learning and development. And we got to find that way to convey that skill and that conviction to our people, our students, and surely our leaders. I think that's about all you guys can tolerate of me. And I apologize. If I possessed some social skills, we'd go for another hour. But Julia has figured out that a 1 hour dose of rabid birthday party clown is all you can tolerate. And so I can't tell you how much I appreciate the fact that we got to have a genuine conversation in a more intimate group. I'm glad that that's happened.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Very inspiring, and wishing you a good day.
Yeah,
Thank you, everyone.
some TED Talks, Rich. I think that's in your future.
Well, I would do that, except I'm hiding out from the law, and All right, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye now.